The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar, SMB Cybersecurity Hindsight 2020. My name is Deborah Frazier, and I'm here with the CEO of Cyberin, Jeff Ulick, who is going to provide some wonderful insight into the main types of cybersecurity threats during the pandemic and how to respond or prevent them. This webinar is intended for small and medium-sized business executives and their IT people. Our goal is to provide informed and actionable information to make informed decisions on their cybersecurity strategy. First, we want to briefly introduce you to our companies and ourselves. Next, we will talk about the different types of compliance and frameworks and supply chain risk assessments. Then we will spend a lot of time on the current threats and the solutions to combat them. First, INSI chose Cyberin as our cybersecurity partner to provide more advanced 24/7 security monitoring, response, and remediation, more than what we could do internally without a huge investment. Fortunately for us, Cyberin only sells to small and medium-sized businesses through channel partners like ours, and we are very excited to be their Atlanta channel partner. Okay, why INSI? To understand this, you must know a little bit about the traditional IT support models to know how our program, Customized IT, compares to them. To start, the typical complaints of the traditional IT support programs include poor resolution and response time, high turnover with the engineers, repeat issues, and their services often overlap with the client's IT support services, which always leads to finger pointing. These issues arise from engineer high turnover in the industry, low unemployment rate in the industry, assigning the wrong engineer to the tickets, and not leveraging the senior engineer's strengths to their fullest potential. Taking all of this into consideration, we created the Customized IT program. Customized IT completely transformed the way that IT services are delivered. We separated out every service and engineering level into its own offering, which allowed us to, one, significantly lower the cost on tiers 1 and 2, also known as help desk. This represents 80% of the tickets. Two, we increased the resolution time by having engineers only work at their level. Three, we rapidly increased response time with our escalation program, while also training the original engineer on it who continued to own the ticket. And fourth, we reduced turnover by providing a better career path for our engineers. Our Customized IT program is ideal for companies that have their own internal IT departments, or they want to choose their own services, or they have tech-savvy end users. They can get the exact level of service that they want, no more, no less. In fact, we can even help companies slowly transition to their own full internal IT department. The page you see here is on our website at www.insi.net. It's under the Customized IT section, and it gives a complete description of each service by clicking on any one of these tabs. In short, we listened to the main complaints of the traditional IT support plans, and we came up with a better structure that is much more affordable. We still have fully managed IT support services. However, since we don't have Tier 3 engineers spending 80% of their time on entry-level Tier 1 and Tier 2 support, we're able to be much more cost-effective. I would now like to hand this over to Jeff Ulick, CEO of Cyberin. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Deborah, and welcome everybody. Appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. I'm just going to quickly review a little bit about who we are and what we do. First and foremost, at Cyberin, we help companies reduce and manage cyber risk. We do that by delivering a basket of services, and you can see here that we organize those services into two distinct groups. One is called strategic services, which are designed to help businesses build security programs, as well as just make good, well-informed decisions on the investments that they make in security. Normally starts with a risk assessment, which can set a baseline for where the company's program is today versus where they want to go. And then by using information from that assessment, we can create a plan. And then once you begin to implement a plan, you have operational needs, which means that you either go out and you hire people and buy technology and build processes, or you plug into a service provided by a company like Cyberin, which is where the other basket of services come in, our managed services, which help support those operational security needs. So we've been doing this for a little while. We're 5.5 years in, and you can see that we've had very consistent growth over that 5 years. I think that is really reflective of the fact that there's a lot of demand in the market for the services that we provide. We started this business with the idea that we wanted to bring the security strategies and tactics of large organizations down market to mid-market and SMB companies that couldn't necessarily afford to do these things on their own, even though they are clearly necessary. And you can see we've had a lot of success doing that. We've served over 1,000 customers over that period of time. They span all over the world, but the majority of them are here in the United States. Here you see some of those companies. Obviously, we've selected logos you might recognize, like Experian and Morgan & Morgan, NASA, organizations like that. So we do serve, we consider lower enterprise companies, but for every logo on here, there's another 20 from firms that you've probably never heard of who are SMB. So our services, while extend to companies with over 1,000 employees, for the most part, we're serving customers that are between 1 and 300 employees. And we serve those customers through partnerships with companies like INSI, MSPs. We don't have a zillion MSP partners. We seek to really align in a given marketplace with preeminent, well-regarded, well-reputed companies that serve that market. Most MSPs serve a local market. So that is a solid strategy. Plus, they are in most cases the de facto IT departments for SMB type companies. So it works very efficiently for us to work together with an MSP to support the security needs of SMB type clients. And you can also see that these customers span just about every major industry that is out there. Which also, again, reflects just the overwhelming need for the things that we do here at Cyberin. And then finally, this is just some, we like to say, you don't have to take it from us how great we are. There's some third-party acclamation. I just point out two things on this particular slide. One has to do with the MSSP Alert. MSSP Alert is a good website for people that are interested in information on what's going on in security, and particularly in managed security. They've had a ranking of global MSSPs for the last few years, and you can see it started in 2018 with 100, and now it's advanced up to 250 this last year, which these rankings were announced a little over a month ago. We've been in that top 100 since we first applied to be ranked. And we feel like we're in really good company. We are actually ranked one slot ahead this year of CenturyLink, which you might be familiar with that company, being a large telecommunications service company that also does managed security and competes globally with firms like Verizon and AT&T. So we think that puts us in good stead. Another thing I'd point out here is G2. G2 is a website, g2.com. It's a similar service to like Yelp, but it's for business services. And they have a number of categorized business services. Cybersecurity is one of those categories. In fact, there are subcategories to that category. But what they do is they rank service providers based on customer references, which they vet themselves so that you know it's not the CEO's family that's writing positive reviews. So there's a lot of good content on that website in general, but there's a lot of good content on that website that describes what our clients have to say about the way we do business and our competency. So that's a quick overview of who we are, and I think it's back to you then, Deborah.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a wonderful overview. So interestingly, all government compliance programs follow specific frameworks. Now, these include laws, regulations, decrees, and policies, and all which are officially developed and approved by the government. A quick overview of government regulation starts with the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, also known as PCI DSS, which is typically just known as PCI. This is required by all companies who accept, process, store, or transmit credit card information. It was actually created and enforced by Amex, Discover, JBS, MasterCard, and Visa. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a mom and pop shop or a global enterprise. Anyone who deals with credit cards must get PCI compliant. If they don't and a breach occurs, they will be held liable. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, also known as HIPAA, on the other hand, is just for healthcare covered entities and their business associates. I'll cover business associates separately in just a moment because it's a little bit different. Healthcare covered entities include healthcare insurance companies, clearinghouses, practices, clinics, hospitals, elder care, assisted living, and nursing homes, to name a few. Healthcare records hold a tremendous amount of personal information, and because of this, is sold on the black market for up to $250 per record. Therefore, a lot is required, which includes privacy and security policies and procedures, asset tracking, business associate agreements, backups, disaster recovery, contingency planning, and logging, among many others under the Technical and Physical Safeguards. And the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, also known as GLBA, is for companies who offer financial products or services like loans, financial or investment advice, or insurance. The purpose is to explain information sharing practices to their customers and to safeguard sensitive data. Further, they have something similar to business associates, which is called secure service providers, who must also be GLBA compliant. We'll also touch on that in a moment. Sarbanes-Oxley Act, also known as SOX, applies to publicly traded companies in the United States, as well as wholly owned subsidiaries and foreign companies that are publicly traded. Interestingly, it requires companies to maintain financial records for 7 years. It also makes the CEO and CFO personally responsible, and it takes certain security measures into account. The last one I want to cover is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA. It is for schools who receive funding from the United States Department of Education. This regulation allows parents to maintain control over who the educational institute discloses the information to. Interestingly, it's also common for a company to have to follow more than one regulatory compliance. For instance, all healthcare entities must follow HIPAA. In addition, almost all HIPAA, they accept credit cards. Therefore, they must follow PCI. This is where the government regulations get extremely complex and require mapping between the different regulations. Therefore, it is very important to use a company that is familiar with all the different types of frameworks. Jeff, you've seen this in regards to mapping different regulatory frameworks together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I would just caution that if you're one of the organizations that has to comply with more than one regulation, that and you're seeking an outside organization to assess you for that you find an organization that recognizes that there's a lot of data that is similarly required across these regulations, and that is not going to seek to conduct an assessment in a silo for each individual act, but is going to crosswalk that data across those various regulations to save you time and money. There's also different software platforms that you can utilize to maintain compliance because, of course, an assessment of compliance is a snapshot in time. And when and if you get audited, it's probably likely to be a different time than maybe when you've conducted this assessment. And in order to make that a much more seamless event, you can use these programs that'll help capture change that occurs in your environment and then apply that change to the founded data in the original assessment.
Thank you, Jeff.
Now, the government recognized early on that vendors were the cause of many of the security breaches. Therefore, in 2009, they introduced the High-Tech Act. This act requires business associates to be HIPAA compliant. Now, plain and simple, a business associate is a vendor or partner who has access to, transmit, or stores protected health information upon the behalf of the covered entity. Why? Well, let's take a look at the detailed information contained in a medical record. You have your Social Security, health insurance, medical diagnosis, and many other things. One example of the harm that this can cause is a lady who had her medical insurance card stolen, and the impersonator had HIV. Once the clinic noted HIV as a condition, it was uploaded into the Health Information Exchange and shared across multiple networks. Unfortunately, it's not as easy to fix as identity theft for your financial information, because once it gets out there, it spreads and there's really no way to be able to retract it. Unfortunately, this particular lady didn't find out until several months later when she went to get blood at the blood bank. Now, that's just one example. As I mentioned before, because of the wealth of information contained in health records, they are valued up to $250 per record on the black market compared to $5.40 for credit card information. Now, the business associates can actually have several business associates of their own. For instance, they may use a third-party hosting company or contract out some of their work. The business associate requirements go as far and as deep as the information that's shared. This gets really sticky if the vendor outsources some of their work overseas, because then it's very hard to hold those companies accountable. GLBA also requires vendors and their partners that transfer, store, or have access to GLBA data to be compliant, although they call them secure service providers. You can see this contains a fraction of what healthcare records contain, which is why they are worth less on the black market. However, this information can not only lead to identity theft, but bank theft as well. And knowing what you just saw, it's no wonder all 50 states rolled out breach notification laws to make companies responsible for third-party information that they have access to, store, or transmit. And if you think about it, you might want to hold your own vendors and partners accountable. The first step is to identify who you are sharing intellectual property with, like client information, HR information, finances. At first, you may not think that you do this, but I have a cheat sheet that would really open up your eyes. If you message me in the chat room, I'll be happy to share that information with you. In addition, your company might be responsible for breach notification laws to your clients and partners. If so, a risk assessment is a great way of marketing your services in a different way from your competitors. Jeff, have you seen an increase in companies demanding risk assessments from their partners or vendors?
Yeah, well, we're kind of on the front line of that, given the type of business that we're in, and it's really kind of a third rail of compliance is that more and more companies are getting a mature position relative to their vendors, and seeking to rank their vendors based on the cyber risk that they present to themselves. And so it's going to be, it starts out as a survey, and then sometimes they seek for third party affirmation of your credentials, but it really depends on what business that you're in. But where it's trending is that at some point in the future, we're all going to need to maintain a certain level of security posture, a minimum security posture, to do business with one another. Probably and today it's without any real enforcement, but other than, a client may choose not to do business with you because you don't have a particular set of controls in place. Eventually, it appears that state governments and things are also getting involved in setting up regulation requirements for businesses. So ultimately, we'll all have to have a minimum standard.
Absolutely, Jeff. All right, well, we have reached the most anticipated section of this webinar, and that is the most common cybersecurity threats of 2020, now to prevent or respond to them. So, Jeff, it's in your hands now.
So no pressure there. Thank you for that, that build-up. So we're going to start with just a little baselining here around, the general landscape. And I think, okay, good, I do have control. So, and I broke this down to make it pretty simple, but I think it'll come together and make some sense. But, first looking at the bad actors and, what's motivating them and what's happening in that area. The first thing is, unfortunately, cybercrime pays. Verizon data breach report tells us 86% of hacking is financially motivated, and the bad guys have been winning. And obviously, if they're able to make money, there's just going to be more of them, which is happening. The other thing that is aiding the growth of the number of people and organizations involved in cybercrime is the fact that there's like no barrier to entry, or a very low barrier. There always has been, but it's even lower now as exploit kits and things such as ransomware as a service are readily available, which lowers the bar for the level of skill that somebody has to have to engage in these activities. Another thing is the fact that our business lives are more and more digitized, and that just creates more targets. In essence, putting more money in the bank for the robbers to steal. So there's more opportunity for them to win. And the other thing is that I have read maybe two times in the last 5 years of any significant person being held, being charged with a crime and paying and being punished. So the chances are they're going to get away with it, so that also creates an environment where there's more people willing to participate. As far as SMB space goes, we have seen some niche businesses like defense contractors, organizations that are involved in political activities be attacked by nation states. But for the most part, the real threat to the SMB space are just criminals and criminal groups that are seeking to make money. So that's kind of what's going on with the with the bad actors. As far as target goes, it's interesting. So when we started this business 6 years ago, many small businesses were of the mind that they're too small to be a target, that they don't have any IP or they don't have any PII, they don't have data that would be valuable to a third party on the dark web. And they were partially right. because at that time, that was really what hackers were after. They were looking for data they could sell. And yet, even at that time, small businesses still could be a conduit to another target, and which we saw most vividly in December of 2013 when the retailer Target was breached and their point of sale system breached and their customers' information stolen. And it all started from a small air conditioning vendor whose employee had credentials that provided the initial access to the Target network. So even back then, small businesses could be impacted by cybercrime, but today it's different, and the risk is real because hackers have discovered a way to extract money from small businesses, and that's through ransomware. And for what we've seen and what research that we've done to validate what we've seen is that that is a huge threat that is continuing to grow, and it really presents the most likely impacting event that a small business will face today. It's interesting. It's not there's the term phishing, which I think we probably all are familiar with. It's a good term to describe the activity because the bad guys aren't necessarily targeting your business. They're really just targeting a type of vulnerability, which is your people, with a tactic and looking for who they can, they're casting a large net and they're looking who they can catch in that net. And unfortunately, they're having greater and greater success with that tactic and that type of attack. So we're going to see more of it. And in effect, if you're connected to the internet, if your people's use company devices both in your network and outside of your network in public networks, then that threat exists for you. So breaches, I pulled out some information from a report produced by the Poneman Institute. Poneman is the preeminent research center for data privacy and security information policy, and they produce a report every year called The Cost of a Data Breach. And there's just some interesting statistics in here that speak to the value of having a security program, and I thought it would be worth visiting. The first one is regarding dwell time, and if you're not familiar with the term, dwell time is simply the time between when a breach first occurs and when it's discovered and contained by the organization that's been breached. And last year that was 280 days, so 9 months between when it occurred and when it was discovered. And a more disturbing element of that is that over 2/3 of the time when it is discovered, it's not by the company or the organization that was breached, but it was by a third party who then informed that organization. So a third party that was either like the FBI or a third party that was like a sister victim to the event. So that's not good. The other part about that is the longer that a bad actor has to dwell in your environment, the more impactful and the higher the cost of the breach. And so there's an undercurrent theme to everything security, and that is that the quicker that you can identify, respond, and react to an event, the lower the damage of that event. So the other thing that was discovered or uncovered in this report was that the average cost of a breach over the last few years have been kind of consistent, and they were kind of wondering why, because we have so much more information and more controls and more investment in security overall. And what they discovered was that for companies that have good programs, the cost of a breach has gone down more than half. But for those that have no program, it's gone up more than half. So there's more victims that are suffering higher costs of a breach, and then those that have actually implemented good programs are seeing cost savings and positive impact for doing that. The number one strategy or tactic that is a cost saver in the event of a breach for businesses is incident response and preparedness. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end of this session. But again, it really speaks to if you have a good incident response plan, it's another way that you are going to minimize the length of time that it takes to contain the event. On the flip side, the biggest contributor to the cost of a breach is actually lost business, right? So either losing the ability to serve your customers, your factories down, or losing your customers because either your reputation or your service or the breach itself has had a negative impact on them. And that's obviously a very serious problem for a business if they're going to lose customers. And unfortunately, those are really central consequences that can accrue in a ransomware attack. So we're going to drill into this a little bit because, as I said, if you're an SMB, this is the most likely impacting event that you face right now. It's the largest threat. What's interesting about this graph, this was pulled from a document called the Beasley Breach Report. Beasley is an insurance company that underwrites cybersecurity policies for small and medium-sized businesses. And this reflects the growth in ransomware claims over the last 6 years. And you can see, if you go to the right margin, the huge growth from 2018 to 2019. In fact, the biggest growth that's been experienced. It's 131% increase in claims over those 2 years. And that's further substantiated by just recently. So you see the growth of the threat. Back in September, Checkpoint Research Center published a warning that in the previous 90 days, they'd seen a 50% increase in ransomware attacks. And just last week, the day before we were originally going to do this webinar, the FBI put out an alert on an imminent attacks using ransomware on the US healthcare system from Russian-based criminal groups. So this tactic is proving to be very effective for the bad guys, which again just means we're going to see more of it. One of the more disturbing dimensions of these attacks in the past year is that attackers are increasingly launching this ransomware malware in conjunction with banking Trojans, which are used to are designed to sniff out and exfiltrate sensitive data. So in the past, the concern was simply they're going to break in and encrypt your data and hold it hostage for ransom. But now they're inserting these Trojan artifacts, which can be used even after the ransomware has been, or the ransom has been paid and systems unlocked. And of course, one of the standard procedures to insulate yourself from impact of ransomware has been making sure that you have backups that can function and can be used to restore your environment. But depending on what your cycle is for doing backups and what the dwell time is of that particular attack, those backups can be corrupted. And these Trojans can live in those backups such that once you back things up and you paid the ransom, they can come back and either just exfiltrate data or create another attack all over again. So these are real threats, and this is a real concern, and something that is something that has to be addressed in the SMB space. Let me see here. This is a little more data from that Beasley breach report, and this just illustrates the fact that 62% of those claims were in the SMB space versus the 38% that were in the mid-market. So the preponderance of these things are occurring in small businesses. And then the worst thing of all is that 98% of the time the ransom is being paid. So with a success rate like that, we know this threat is real and going to continue. So let's look at the most common pattern of attack that we see, and that is simply that an employee receives a phishing email and either downloads an attachment or clicks a link, which downloads malware, and that malware begins to propagate through or seek through the environment, looking for credentials that it can use to ultimately own the network. And once that network is owned, then everything is encrypted and the ransom demand is made. And I would say that this is probably 80% of the attacks that we see follow this pattern. Last year, we get introduced to a lot of businesses as a consequence of them having an incident like this. They probably had some kind of just antiquated control that did not work against today's attackers. So we do a lot of cleanup after the fact in instances like that. So that's the most common pattern, but let's talk quickly about, how are the ways that they get in. We've kind of grouped these into attack vectors, and the first we call human error. It's interesting in the Verizon data breach report, and if you're not familiar with that research, it's a annually published document. It's very big. There's a lot of good links if you really want to dig in, but it doesn't have as much, I'd say, applicability in the SMB space because it's really gathered from a lot larger organizations, but there are things in there that are relevant. They have a category called error, which is similar to what we have here, called human error. And what's telling about that is that that category has continued to grow over the years in terms of being a higher percentage of how these attacks start. And it seems counterintuitive in the fact that we know a lot more about security than we did 5 or 6 years ago. We seem to be a lot more aware. We've invested a lot more time and attention to being aware, yet it's not mitigating this risk. And there's a few reasons for that. One is because the bad guys are sophisticated and evolve rapidly, where businesses, are not as nimble. The other is that as we digitized our environments, we've added a level of complexity, which in effect increases the size of the landscape that they can pursue. Social engineering, we talked about that already with that common threat pattern. That's phishing, spear phishing, that kind of thing. Misdelivery is when an employee sends credentials or confidential information to the wrong party. And misconfiguration is something that's really big, and we see that more and more, and we see that very frequently when we first enter an account to provide services, and that is that technically something's been misconfigured that actually creates a security vulnerability, and it's just human error, right? And so that speaks to the fact that, as I mentioned, the more stuff that we do and the more complex our technical environments become, there's the more likelihood that these mistakes will be made. So we're going to talk later about how we mitigate these things, but so that's the first one. Technical hygiene is, this is staple security stuff that's been around and understood for some time, and actually improvement's been really made in this area. But it starts with having policies that that account for security in their development, and that are managed for security. And I'm speaking to first, the overprivileging of users, right? So too many environments have too many users with too many privileges that can be exploited, and offer a fast track for bad actors to get control of the environment. So you really need to have good policies on who has access to what and why, and you need to make sure that those policies are enforced. Similarly, vulnerability management, vulnerability scanning and patching, you don't have to look further than the Equifax breach a couple of years ago to understand this. But when we started this business 6 years ago, there was a lot of, this was low-hanging fruit for bad actors, and it was really one of the first things, and it still is. So it still is one of the first things that they will search for as a means to enter an environment. But companies generally, especially larger organizations, have gotten a lot better at closing that window of opportunity, and that's because, back when it was that many times security was really based around compliance, meeting compliance as opposed to reducing risk. So companies would do, vulnerability scans once a quarter to meet their PCI, compliance requirements. But a 90-day window on a known vulnerability is not good, right? So you really have to compress that window and discover published vulnerabilities as quickly as you can within your environment, and then you've got to patch them. And so you have to have good policies and processes in place to ensure that that happens. And then the last thing here is deals with web applications principally. The fact that we do so much business now, and we have storefronts on the internet, and those are just standing out there to be exploited. And so we have to have contemporary tactics in order to ensure that those things are safe and secure. And then lastly, advanced persistent threats. Now we don't see a lot of that in the average SMB company, but it doesn't really matter how big you are. If you have proprietary information, if you're a drug research company, or you work on Defense Department contracts, or you have some special IP or other information that would be valuable on the dark web, then you could be a target for these types of attacks. So those need to be addressed for the companies that are in that niche. But these are the three main avenues of attack that we see. So how do you stop them? I'm not going to get into too much detail because we've got limited time on how these services technically function, although I'll give a bit of an overview. But all these services are designed to blunt those most likely attack vectors. And we're going to start with what we call managed detection and remediation. So the tech industry loves acronyms, and security is no different. MDR is probably one of the most prevalent acronyms over the last 24, 30 months. And it generally stands for managed detection and response. We take it a little further. We call it remediation because we have the ability to roll back environments to pre-breach states, skipping that whole painful part of having to re-image and restore all your systems from backup or from images. But basically, this type of a service is meant to blunt that whole human error part, right? And it does that in a couple of different ways. So the most active part of human error is employees and their devices being impacted through their actions. And so this service is built on what's called endpoint detection and response technology, which evolved out of traditional antivirus type security tools. If you're using a traditional signature-based antivirus tool, then you've got something that's no more than a speed bump, if at all, to today's bad actor. It will not be effective. The technology we use is it prevents. So when that employee clicks that link, nothing will happen. Because the technology will evaluate the actions that malware is attempting to perform and determine that it is malicious. It'll also detect behavior of users that if a user's machine attempts to do a process like use PS exec or PowerShell that it normally shouldn't do or couldn't do, it'll stop that in its tracks. So being able to stop things before they execute is as secure as you can get. And so, so this technology enables us to do that. And what we do is we layer on the expertise to implement it. And something that's really critical in the security space in general is, and I've been, and our team has been involved in data center infrastructure, both as end users and as service providers for 25 years. And so we recognize, a lot of the need that's associated and what those environments are like. But nothing is more dynamic than security because the actors are so, nimble and evolving, and at the same time, the environments that we seek to protect are always changing too. So you really need expertise in constant tuning of the tools that are used in security, and people that have both the engineering experience to implement the tool, but then have the analytical experience to use the tool, because this tool can also, and this service will also hunt in the environment and seek out those artifacts. Say if we come into an environment that's been a victim of ransomware and we set up, this new fortress technology and services to help protect them, those artifacts can still be in there until we sniff them out. And so this tool enables us to do that. Or if they in effect try and trigger, stick their head up, we will be able to identify them at that time and then prevent them from executing what they want. We can also use this technology to, if the technology itself blunts an attack, we can then take forensic information from that and determine where it came from and block those actors from being able to attempt it again. So there's a lot of good stuff here because it stops that execution from occurring and it prevents the impact of human error. Second service here is, this is fairly understood, right? As we were speaking earlier about the risks associated with not knowing that you have vulnerabilities in your environment, not patching them. So what we do is we do what's called real-time scanning. So the environment is constantly being scanned. So if you had 26 devices, it starts with device 1, it goes to device 26, and then it starts that rotation all over again. And whatever amount of time that takes is the amount of time it takes to scan the entire environment continuously and assess whether or not any newly published vulnerabilities exist and alert when they do. There's no other way, there's no better way to compress the time between when a vulnerability is identified. And so we start with that, and then the second part is you've got to patch it when it is discovered. And so we use tools that enable us to do that for a huge amount of technology that's out there. So by doing those two things efficiently, we greatly, we close that window and we greatly reduce the risk associated with technical vulnerabilities. And then we have the ability to add, a feature on there that deals with applications and specifically regarding web applications from their development to being put into production. First, helping them being developed with secure code, and then second, once they're public facing, being able to secure them almost like a firewall for the application itself, and make sure that those aren't vulnerable to bad actors either. And then finally, for those last two services are essential for any business, and for every business there's really solid value in those services. The managed SIM is for the mature program or for companies that are in regulated industries, right? And what it does is it puts a spotlight on all the other security controls in the environment. It aggregates log data from any source that you want it to aggregate log data, and then it looks for anomalies in behavior. And so we talked earlier about dwell time. So this is the tool that will, or the service that will most effectively reduce dwell time, because it will signal by creating an alert when something is anomalous to an educated analyst who will then assess that alert and determine whether or not it's just a quirk or an incident which occurs rarely, but it's not dangerous, it's not malicious, or whether it's something that needs to be dealt with. And then we'll determine what that dealing with means, what has to be done in order to mitigate that risk and remedy that situation. So that is really designed as the fail-safe, as well as the number one tool in the quiver for advanced persistent threats. So lastly, if all fails, right, you need to have a plan on how you're going to respond And it can be as complicated or as simple as you want it. You just need to have a plan that's been rehearsed. When something occurs, again, it goes back to you have to respond quickly, and time is of the essence. This stuff propagates so rapidly through networks. So having it mapped out, how we're going to respond if something happens, who's responsible for what, how we communicate to one another is critical. And then rehearsing that plan. I can't tell you how many times we might have an incident, and somebody has a number that's not right, or an email that's not right, or that person that's responsible for that isn't right because the client has not properly prepared for this. So this is something that's it takes time. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of money to put together a plan. So it's very important that at minimum you have a plan mapped out as to how you're going to respond to an incident if it actually occurs. And I could say, they say that it's not a matter of if, but when you'll be breached. And I can say honestly that we haven't seen that, but what we have seen is that you will be targeted. And if you're not prepared, you will be breached. So that kind of concludes my part of this session. I'll turn it back over to you, Deborah, from here.
Thank you. That was wonderful insight, Jeff. Great. Well, we are ready for the question and answer time. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat session. We'll be happy to answer them. So we'll give it a few seconds here. Great. All right. The first question is do I need cybersecurity insurance?
Well, that depends, right? So, insurance doesn't reduce your risk. It does reduce, I guess, the financial burden if something goes wrong, or it hedges that burden. It really depends on. It's probably not a bad thing. It depends on what your business is. If your business is like our business, yes, you need it, and you need a lot of it, because if something happens to you, it could really impact somebody else, and that's where the liability really escalates. If it's hedging a payout to a ransomware actor, it's probably still worth it because the rates have actually come down. In fact, we're in the process of negotiating with an underwriter to provide that just as part of what we do. I did fail to mention, with our MDR service, there is $1 million worth of cyber liability insurance that accompanies that. It's got some, some caveats in that that controls need to be set up in a certain way and that kind of thing. But in general, it may cost less than $1,000 a year, probably, for $250,000 worth of cyber liability insurance. And then the critical part there is what it actually pays for, right? So you got to make sure you read the fine print, but it's not bad. Just remember, it's not reducing your risk or your security. It's not enhancing your security.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. The next question is, how can I ensure my business associate is compliant? And all right, do you mind if I take that, Jeff?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, this is the same regardless of whether or not you're set up under a framework by a business partner, or you have to be compliant as a business associate for a healthcare entity because you do business with a healthcare entity, or the same thing if you have to handle GLBA information. What I've done in the past when I've had to go out and talk to business associates to ensure that they were compliant for my clients is I would ask them specific information that was within my framework. So as an example, go to your own framework and start asking them information within that. So as an example is how do they share employee turnover? How do they or where do they store their data? And then you'll get to know exactly where the data is. Is it in a hosting center? And do they have a business associate agreement with them? Also, what is their policy for just different random things like disposal of units, or how they do their logging, or how they track their assets. Different information like this will let you know. I mean, one is are they prepared to answer those questions? Those are pretty common things that they should know right off bat. And secondly, you can dig in a little bit deeper. If they're not doing, if they don't have a service to do daily logging, then that's a really big clue, because it is practically impossible to keep up with that. Don't you agree, Jeff?
Yeah, it's not easy.
Keep up.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And then another thing is how do they provide continuous training to their employees? So I would just get into the details there and ask very, very specific questions and find out how prepared they are to answer them. I mean, I know our policies and procedures pretty well. And I found that those that aren't ready to answer those questions just aren't prepared.
So it also speaks to what we were talking about earlier with third-party risk. So if you really want to take a mature approach to it, you'll create classifications for the type of vendors, or as you call partners or business associates. What risk do they present to you or your clients based on what they're, what the partnership is, what service they're providing. You rank those, and then you'll have an ABC classification, and you'll have a different level of scrutiny associated with each of those classifications based on how much risk they present. And that scrutiny is usually questionnaires, and may require some third-party validation if it's a high-risk relationship.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question I think that leads into that. Do you have any advice on selecting a framework for building a security program? Jeff?
So, there's like 30 something different frameworks out there, but what we normally advise, if you're an SMB company and you do all your business domestically in the United States, the cleanest, simplest framework is the NIST CSF framework. It is specific to security controls, so it's tight. If that's not the case and you do business globally, or either you have operations in foreign countries or your revenue comes from foreign entities who may be governed by different security standards, then ISO 27001 may be a better framework for you, because it's an international standard, which is then obviously recognized then by foreign countries. And both these things are also designed to help you comply with whatever industrial regulations that you may face within your own country. So really those two are good ones to assess, one or the other.
Okay. Well, that wraps up our time. It is now 2:00. We promised to keep this within an hour. So I appreciate everybody who joined us today. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, we will be sending out a recording to those that attended. And if you have any other questions, you see our contact information in front of you. Thank you, and we hope that that this was useful for you, and if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you.